We've talked about the power of PowerShell. Let's talk about the shell of PowerShell. Now, when we speak of a shell in computing, what we're actually referring to is the user interface with the kernel of the operating system. Every operating system has a kernel. In Windows 10, the kernel is NT10. In Windows Vista, it was NT6. In Windows 7, it was NT6.1. In other words, it was only a minor revision, actually, between Vista and Windows 7. But the kernel of the operating system is what's actually going on. It's the heart of the operating system, if you will. The CPU of the system board, for example, is kind of like the heart of the system board. Well, this is the heart of the operating system. Everything else, the programs that are added on the outside, such as clock and calendar and things like that, or Microsoft Word, are just some programs, and then the shell is the interface. Now, in early days, DOS was the shell. It was how we spoke to the kernel. And then later on, the GUI, or Windows, became the shell, and you could still work in the command line, which was a version of the shell. PowerShell is a version of the shell. In Linux, you have such things as Bash, Corn Shell, C Shell, and so on, a whole bunch of different shells, and that's one of the things that makes one version of Linux different from another. And in the GUI version, or in the GUI world, Windows itself is the shell. Now, one thing that's important to understand is that people use terminology differently, and sometimes you'll hear people refer to the shell as only a command line interface. Sometimes in some meanings, GUI, any kind of GUI such as Windows or Apple, do not qualify as shells, although they actually do qualify as shells. But in some people's writings, or in the way that some people speak, when they speak of the word shell, they usually mean a command line interface. And so just keep that in mind, that there are differences in the way that that's used. And some people may even argue that a shell is only a command line interface, although that's really strictly not true. So when we speak of PowerShell, we're speaking of something that's powerful and something that is a window into the kernel of the operating system.